Okay guys, I'm working on a value study of some rocks, getting this video to you. I think it might be a good idea to just start out by doing like a little value study. I'm going to send you some of these pictures too so that you'll have them, but let me just show you right quick. This is the black and white version of the photo, and then here's a color version. Okay, so I'm going to start with the grayscale first, but just because I want to focus on all of my value. Value is everything that's right here. I don't have to worry about color information here, and I can just focus on form and value. So both of these are little square thumbnails basically. So I've taped off my paper accordingly, and I'm just sort of finishing up this little sketch. I'm making a second one down here of the same exact thing, but I've started to add some value to the top one. While that was drying, I was just going to come down here and add another one of these, and I spared you the watching everything so that you didn't have to sit through all that. Let me just pay attention for a second, make sure I've got everything in here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to hold this up a little bit closer. Now, the top one, I'm just going to focus on doing black and white, and then I'm going to do the second one, adding the color. But I want you to take a look at this. I've just put a little bit of value in there to get started, making sure to leave all of my white areas protected. And I did this by wetting the whole area with clear water and then started to drop in some of the bloodstone. You can see the bloodstone has that really nice granulated texture. It really just has that appearance of the surface of stone, so it's a really great color to use for that. So I'm going to continue on here. This is dry enough for me to get back into it. I'm going to do this entire this one up here. I'm going to do it entirely with just the bloodstone, using different values of it, different degrees, and I'm just using my photo reference, and I'm just, this is just going to be a black and white, almost like think of it almost like a pencil sketch, and just focus on the values after you get it drawn in. So I'm just going to work for just a minute instead of talk. You just want to make sure you get these values right. I have kind of made a jump from, I did sort of a medium light value over the whole thing, leaving the really light areas light, okay? And then I'm coming back in and actually going a little bit dark, and this is not as dark. This is not my darkest dark, but I'm jumping down in value just a little to kind of establish these heavy areas. As we've been working on some of these paintings that have got the boulders, they are a little bit of a challenge because they are so kind of nondescript in a way, and if they're not carefully handled, then you kind of wind up with a little bit of a mess. So depending on your painting, if you've, like this, I mean, we're really focusing on these boulders and exactly what they're doing, the best we can. But if you just have some rocks in the painting, sometimes you can just sort of just get away with paying attention to just putting in some, making the values show up. And you don't have to very carefully render the rocks. You can just sort of make some, imply some shape and form. And then the rest of your composition will provide all the clues that are necessary to let the viewer know that you're actually looking at some rocks. It's really good to do some value studies, not just in pencil, but also with your paints. Just choosing a color, and it doesn't necessarily have to be gray. You could use some other color. You just want to make sure that it's a nice, rich color that can give you a wide range of value. Some of the more transparent colors, they're just never going to get quite dark enough. Okay, so it's good to use something that's, a gray or maybe a blue. Ultramarine is good, but bloodstone's really fun to work with. I'm going to raise this up to you just a little bit so you can see a little bit more of these textures, but it just makes that nice granular look. So all I'm doing right now is just kind of going back over with a little bit of water in some of these areas where I had just worked to kind of lift and move a little bit of this pigment. Not a lot. I don't want to disturb it too much. And you can start to see some of these little shapes sort of show up. The form starts to come into play a little bit more. One of the things that's really tough about working with stones, especially if you're just focusing on having the boulders, even though they're very realistic objects that are sitting right there in front of us, they can almost take on sort of an abstract look, and then it's easy to kind of get lost in it and sort of lose your place and you can't quite figure out what you're looking at anymore. But just try to focus on your values, and I'm taking time to sort of squint a little bit here and there to make sure that I'm kind of keeping up with where I am. Okay, I've got some more washes to do over the top of this, but it's too wet, so I'm going to dry it right quick. Okay, so I'm just going to come back in here and start. This is all dry now, so I can come back in and start applying a few more values on top without everything running around too much. I'm just laying in a little bit of color up here in some of these places, just on the dry paper. But then I kind of want to soften it just a little bit. just with a damp brush. And just pay attention to where the values are. It's easy to want to just kind of start speckling around randomly, kind of like when we work on our trees or that type of thing, but unfortunately the boulders are a little less forgiving and they really require some attention. Just a little cast shadow on the top of that rock. And there's a lot of texture. I guess some things are growing on the side of this rock, but it's still very light in value. This is the lightest, this is a very light value in this whole photo over on this face of this rock. So be careful when you're adding some tone in here. It does have a lot of texture, but you want to make sure that you don't overdo it with your value. You want texture, but not too much value. And then it does get a little dark right up under here. And just take some time to kind of squint all along to make sure you're matching the value. And I've kind of worked over this area a good bit right here, and it's gotten really wet, so there's a few extra things that need to be done to it, but I'm going to have to move on to another area for just a second so that I can let that dry. Just coming back in here and building up some of these textures. And the textures really just present themselves, especially when you're looking at this in black and white, they just present themselves as value. This whole little rock that's sort of tucked away behind, it's a good bit darker. Well, I take that back, it's marginally darker than this one in the front. I like doing black and white studies of difficult subjects because it really just kind of takes some of the pressure off, and you can just focus on, it's almost like going back to pencil drawing. You're just, which is very important, by the way. Your drawing skills are really at the base fundamental level of your painting skills. So the more you practice with your sketching and getting your values in, it really does make a difference in your work. And practicing in black and white is a very nice way to do that. This straw is really kind of dark over here on this side and right in here, but in the middle it does kind of lighten up just a bit. Okay, I think I'm at another point where I'm going to have to dry. Now I'm going to come back in here and just keep building the values. Some of these areas are so close in value, they kind of blend in. And I haven't gone for my really heaviest darks yet. Okay, I'm still building some of these medium dark to sort of dark medium values in here. There is a little bit of bounced light going on up under this boulder over here, and you can make it more pronounced just on your own to help it read a little bit better if you want. Another cast shadow on this rock. I'm going to darken this one up here a little bit. Just doing a little bit of dry brush work on the face of this stone right here, just to try to pull out some of that texture, but without adding, you know, too much value here. This edge right in here just kind of gets lost a little bit. I like that. You can even sort of overdo it right there if you want. Okay, one more drying and then I'm going to start adding my really dark values. All right, so I'm going to go back down to my little dagger brush here, and I want to mix up still getting some of the bloodstone, but I'm not thinning it too much. I want this to be pretty concentrated so that I can go in here and really punch into some of these darks. And the bloodstone it's a lot lighter when it dries. So even though I'm getting some of these places really, really dark, if it lightens up on me a little bit too much, I'll still come back in and add a little bit more if I need to. It's really, really dark right in this little slot right here. This is an important part in your drawing right here. You want to make sure that this, let me bring the photo. You can see this shadow, let me use my pencil, this shadow comes across that's being cast, but then it joins right back up with this shadow that's right up under the rock. So you want to make sure that that's a continuous shape right there, or else you'll lose that, you'll lose the sense of reality that that's really cutting through. And I know that this is right up on top of this rock, but it really is a dark value in both of these places. It just really cuts in sharply right there. But after I lay that value in, I'm just going to come back in with a little bit of a damp brush and just soften that edge and kind of pull that value across this area. And same thing down here. There's places where it really is dark. I'm just using a little bit of a dry brush technique to kind of scrape in some of these little rough textures on this part. And then right up under here, really dark right here. I might come back, I think I will. I'll probably come back after I get all of this in here. There's some nice, lots of bright highlights on all those little pieces of straw. And putting something like that in to help anchor and give some kind of contextual clue that these are boulders, adding some little textures into that straw, I think will be beneficial. Work on that at the end here. Soften that a little. See, these big sharp value changes really make this boulder start to have form, because it was very brightly lit, really strong light direction when I was able to get this photo. And this little dagger brush is perfect for getting into these little crevices. Gracious. I might need to darken it a little. And it's definitely really dark down in this little slot here between these two rocks. But then it starts to lighten up as it gets to the top. So just with some water, I'm just gonna soften this transition right here. And also there's some shadow coming up onto the side of the rock from down in this little hole. So I'm just taking some of this shadow and just brushing it up onto the side of the boulder here. Just brushing it straight up out of that little area. There's a little bit of cast shadow on this little rock. As you keep going through the painting a little bit more, you'll just see more and more things that maybe you need to add. few little spots where I can increase some of this value. You gotta really look closely, and sometimes even I have misjudged a couple of values and I'm having to go back in and deepen those just a little bit to get this to start really looking like a boulder. Lots of squinting. I can risk getting a little darker down in here. But this rock is a little darker back here. I'm going to deepen this value. Oops, I didn't have any paint on there. Just adding a little bit of texture. The end of this rock, it's got an interesting shape, but it does have some texture on the end. But I want to be careful with it and not add a lot of value out there, because I don't want to mess up that really light value that needs to be out there. The light kind of just wraps around this little shape up here, but it's really dark back here at the back. Nice contrast right against the top of this boulder. I've kind of got some drawing errors with that piece of rock, but I'm still going to try to just keep getting the value right in here. It is a good bit darker than this main boulder right here in the front. A little extra bit of value here. I'm going to deepen the value of this straw just a little bit down in the front, a couple of places. Now I'm just coming in with a little bit of water to soften these edges that I just made. The straw, it's still not as dark as the shadows right up under the rocks. I might need to strengthen that just a little. Those darker shadows underneath. I'm just doing another little wash across the top there. And there is sort of some kind of little bits of straw that are coming up into this rock down here. And I think once we add some of the straw, again, that's those little contextual clues that let us know, that help us with scale and all of that. I'm coming back in here to deepen just a little bit of this in here. It really needs to, those darks really need to go recede back even further. The bloodstone is great to work with for doing just a value study like this. Its color is just, I don't know if it's reading as well across the screen, but it's such a great color. Alright, so I've got some of my gouache out here. This is just the white, the permanent white, and just getting some on my little dagger brush. I don't want it to be too thin, but you know, just somewhere kind of in the middle. And you know, there's a lot of texture going on here. I'm not going to overdo it, but I do want to just come in here and just let me make sure how much I've got on my brush. Let me get some of my, got my brush a little bit too thick. You can test it over on the side to kind of see how big of a little stroke you're going to get. And so I'm using a very light hand. I'm not actually letting the brush press down into the paper at all. I'm almost just sort of letting the brush barely edge against, it's barely making contact with the paper. And I'm not going to fill in this whole area. I think that'll be a little bit overkill, but letting some of these little pieces of straw sort of lift up and cross over into the shadow areas helps it to read a little bit more like it really is some kind of straw or something growing. And this straw is sort of going in all different kinds of directions, so be mindful of that. And then I kind of like that there's some kind of little bits of straw that are visible kind of down in here. I don't want to overdo this though, but it kind of helps us with some of those little clues that there are other things in the picture. I don't know that I'll add any more than that. I think that's going to be enough. Now what I'm going to do is take my brush. This is just, I've cleaned everything out. This is just a little bit of a damp brush. And then just down here on the bottom, I'm going to come back and kind of soften some of these strokes. Not all of them, but just kind of soften it a little bit. I don't want them to be harsh, strong, linear marks. I want them to just sort of coexist with all this value in here. I don't want too much attention coming to it. I just want it to be soft. And it is possible, I could have tinted my white just a little bit so that I was making more of a gray mark instead of a white mark. That would have actually been the smart thing to do. But this sort of corrects it a little bit. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to work on this color one, and to get it started, it's a very similar approach to the one that I just did. I'm going to wet the whole area. And then I'm going to get into my bloodstone again and just make a thin kind of wash. And I just want to sort of come into these areas where it's dark to just lay in a little bit of tone, and also that nice little granulating texture that the bloodstone is so good at. I'm just kind of looking back at my photo and sort of just putting these little marks in where some of these darker values were. And I think that's it. Just, protecting this lighter area, very much like how I started this one, okay? All right, so we'll dry that. Okay, there's not a tremendous amount of color in these rocks, but the rocks that are sort of that golden reddish tone, I'm using a little bit of quin sienna and a little bit of quin gold together, and also mixing it with just a little bit of the bloodstone, so I get sort of this this tawny kind of mixture. But I'm putting some of the bloodstone in it to give it a little bit of tint, and that's also going to the granulating property that's in the bloodstone is going to have an effect, when I use another color. So I'm just going to come in with some of these areas that are this warm, whatever kind of orange, rusty tone, and go ahead and put these in. And I don't know if you can see it happening, but even that reddish color, it's giving me some nice granulation because I put some of that bloodstone in there. Now I'm just this is a really flat sort of wash of that color, and that's okay. That's kind of all I'm trying to do right now. And then I'll carry this throughout the painting into some of these other areas that I see. And I'm just putting it right on top of where that other color was, where we had put the bloodstone in there. And because it's so transparent, it's still, that texture just reads through, so it's really nice. All of these rocks pretty much over here on this side they've got kind of a reddish tone a little bit. There's some of that red color happening up in this boulder a little bit. But it doesn't have a hard edge like that, so I'm just coming in with some water and softening that. Being careful, I want to keep a nice sharp contrast between these two areas right here. I do see maybe some greenish tones happening. I'm going to mix it with some of that tawny kind of color to sort of put it down just a little bit. I don't want it to be too bright. And there may be even some of that green peeking around on these other rocks. So if you see it, you know, just drop it in there. So we're basically just kind of doing like a wash of colors on top of that foundation of bloodstone tint that we put in there. Okay, now at this point, the other coloration, you know, that I see in here is very similar to just kind of the black and white. There may be some, I did mix a little bit of that greenish color in with the black to start laying in some of these other values, but I'm just going to kind of start putting some of these medium tones in here, pretty much like I did as I approached the painting of just the black and white. Mixing just a little bit of these warm tones with you can see there's a little bit of warmth to that. It's not as just black and white as the first one. So I want to tie these colors together a little bit. So mix just a little bit of that rusty color in with the bloodstone. Alright, so I'm just going to kind of move through this one and just paint. Now up here in the straw, this is a pretty heavy dose of the Quin Sienna mixed in with the bloodstone to give me sort of that pine straw color. It's just a sort of a reddish brown. And I can tell you, you know, once you've done a value study of the same thing and then you start to introduce some more color into it, you really are freed up sort of mentally to just really explore your color, because you've kind of got the muscle memory for the values already in there. I had a little bit of a bleed come into the rock right here, but I kind of like it. I'm not going to touch that. I like the way that it looks. So. bit too far into that one. Let me dry that. All right, let's keep going on this. All right, so I just really love how the texture looks with the bloodstone. It's really, really nice. All right, I'm just gonna keep going through the painting and just adding there's some kind of like a greenish thing happening on the end of that. I'm just gonna go through and start looking for things that I need to do in terms of my colors. Okay, this is like all these sort of greenish things and all these rusty oxidized looking colors on the rock. Just focusing on all these sort of middle and light values right now. I haven't started working on my darks yet. I'm taking advantage of the paper being just barely damp so that the paint does move a little bit, but not much. It makes these nice little shadows. You have to be patient with it and let the paper dry out just a little, but not all the way, to get some of these soft blended edges. I'm still seeing some green in here somewhere. me dry this so I can start getting my darks in. Okay, I'm going to just start working some of my darks in. Again, just with the bloodstone. Ooh, whoops. I did what I told you guys to watch out for. I started painting into my shadow that was on the rock. So I'll have to modify that in just a second. So I'm just correcting my little mistake up here earlier. I'm lifting out that where I got too dark for that shadow. Okay, I'm just painting and not talking. I'm just putting in some of these dark values here. Pretty much like in the other one. For the shadows on this sort of reddish rock, make sure that your shadow is not just bloodstone, but make a dark red for helping these shadows to read into that red rock. There may be some spots where you can just drop in a little bit of the bloodstone after you've gotten sort of a layer of that warm shadow tone down there. I might be seeing a little bit of a bluish tint in some of this rock. If you want to put some of that in there, just do it sparingly. You do want to, if you're seeing that value, let it be there, but I'm using my little scrub brush to sort of lift out a little spot here where I got it too dark. Okay, I'm just going to come back over on this side and work on these dark values. It's really, really dark right in these little crevice areas. This is just the bloodstone. Now that I've got that really dark in there, I can soften some of these areas where the shadow wraps up around the rock, and just keeping my brush clean. If I start moving around too much pigment, then I can just wipe it off a little bit. get into these little crevices up here, or these little shapes that were formed. Just barely coming up against the edge of that pigment that I placed there on dry paper, just to move it around a little bit. There's just a little bit of gray on my just a thin wash, just to come in here and again try to add some texture to the side of this rock, but without deepening the value. I want to keep it nice and light in comparison to the rest. Doing a little dry brush. This little brush is so handy. It does so many things. I just love it. And it does look like there's some blue in here in places. If you want to play around with that, you can. You don't have to. Getting into some of these really dark little spots. Just going around looking for values. There's a little cast shadow on this rock. I forgot about it. And then I don't know what all these bunch of little textures in here. There's a little bit of bounced light right on the bottom of this rock. I want to try to get that back. I'm just brushing that with my little scrub brush. Just lifting out. There we go. And it really starts to take on some form. Let's see. Let me just do a quick double check of where I'm at here. I'm just squinting and looking for values at the moment. this is definitely a good exercise in observation. I'm just going back through to see if there's any little areas I can brighten up just a little bit. I'm just scrubbing with a damp brush right here, just to kind of lift up some of these areas that I might have lost a few little edges. Bottom of that rock looks a little weird to me, but I don't know there's much that I can do to change its shape right now, so I'm just going to go with what I've got and make sure it wins. Get the right value in here. Just a little bit of water to let that bleed out, just a little. Let me dry that, and then I'll add a few little bits of texture for that straw. All right, this time I'm still going to use my gouache like before. It's dried up a little bit, but I am going to tint it, and I'm going to tint with let's see. Oops. I'm going to get some of this sort of this tawny color that I was using for the rocks earlier. Just get it out here on my tape just a little bit. I try not to stick my brush back into the palette after I've got some gouache on it. It's going to need to be a little bit darker. There we go. All right, so there's some paint to work with. And you can see I'm just making sort of this, it's just kind of a tan color, but it's got that gouache in there, so it's going to give me not such a harsh little shape. That's much better. I think that might be all I do. If you didn't notice it, I came back up here and doctored this area a little bit. I went in here, wet this, and lifted out some of that gouache that I had put in there. Just did too much. It was just too much. And so, but tinting this really made a nice difference. And I forgot there was a few little bits of straw that are kind of coming up on this little rock down here. Okay. I think I'm going to call that a wrap on this. All right, so I'm going to take the tape off. It helps to kind of let you see it and compare better what's going on. Alright, there we go. Alright, so there's a couple of little rock studies, and you can really see the texture of that bloodstone. It's so nice. It's really good. And this little format kind of works out nice. You can map off a couple of squares, and then there's some margin over here if you want to make notes about your work. So there's some good practice, and I'll have the pictures up for you, and I'll talk to you guys later.